like many of us here, I imagine, my sort of introduction to understanding the complete sort of train wreck that that I was experiencing as the results of an addictive process was through going into treatment, and it was a 12-step treatment center that I was lucky enough to sort of find myself in, and you know, I'd been seeking hard at that stage. I had got fully into meditation and into sort of spirituality, and you know, having shut down all of that in my kind of teens, that was a big sort of reawakening. But I didn't have the kind of the understanding of what was happening behaviorally, and the understanding that the way that I was eating was massively changing the way that I felt, and making me iller, whilst at the same time sort of making my immediate experience more tolerable. So I didn't have that understanding, and to get that understanding that there was an addictive process going on was unbelievably helpful. And you know, the kind of disease model approach at the time was just brilliant, because I just really needed to change my behavior. That's what I needed. I didn't need so much more than that at that time. And the place where I went, you know, it was very much aligned to the disease model approach, and you know, strongly advocated that the reason that, you know, I or anyone else had addictive processes going on was because I had been born with this condition and this way of responding to the world, and all I needed to do was to learn to sort of manage all the feelings that I had in a different way, and that you know, obviously learn how to manage the cravings, learn how to process stuff, get a sense of belonging and connection with other people, and you know, spirituality, and you know, get an understanding of the things that had happened in my life that had contributed to it, but ultimately, you know, to sort of accept that this was just me, and this was the root out. And you know, I feel very grateful about that. It was really helpful. You know, there are, however, you know, over time, I've realized that for me, it's been really important to kind of broaden out my understanding of what got me to that place of complete and utter self-hatred and self-destruction, beyond simply, you know, having a raging eating disorder. And it's been really healing to my sense of self, and that really deep core sense of shame that I've carried for as long as I can remember, to investigate that and to explore deeply, you know, where that came from, and as much as possible, you know, sort of what experiences contributed to it, and to start to relate to those parts within me that are still smarting or still in deep pain from those experiences, to you know, to be heard, to be felt, to be met with empathy and kindness, and you know, when I can't manage those, at least toleration. That has been, you know, a hugely healing thing. And so, you know, for me, it's been really helpful to get an understanding of developmental trauma, and you know, there's the whole big trauma thing, or trauma with a big T, and that being, you know, recognizably profoundly distressing experiences like war, or you know, some kind of explicit abuse. But, for me, my trauma has been very much with a little t. It's been, death by 1,000 cuts. And to all extents and purposes, I had the wonderful upbringing, and certainly physically had everything that I could ever want and need, and and genuinely loving parents. I know that they loved me, but of course they also were carrying their own emotional wounds and were unable to communicate that love in a way that I was able to really deeply and profoundly receive. And so in my investigations, I think initially quite a lot of that was sort of obvious to me, or was kind of accessible to me. And, I could see how my mother's anger and rage when I was a child, really scared me, and her sort of stress levels combined with that anger and rage kind of created a whole response in my nervous system, where I think, where ideally I would have learned to tolerate challenges by witnessing her dealing with those things in a way where she could manage her emotions and her sort of charges and her fear and her anger and stuff, and then come back to a sort of base level sense of safety and relaxation, then I think I probably would have internalized that myself. But that wasn't available to me, as it wasn't available to her. And so I think from a very young age, I kind of ingested that setting. Life is scary, life is stressful, life has to be forced through rather than rested into or trusted. And so, I think that set me up for a lot of the patterns that came later. And then, but what is interesting is then reflecting on, well, if that's the case, if it was all about my parenting, how come my brother and sisters don't have, such extreme or sort of apparent problems that I have? And so that was something that made me always have to reflect. And my sort of, investigate, my best sort of thinking around it is that there is a very significant part of this constellation is what we're born with, or what we come into this life with, the way that we respond to stuff. And I've just seen the time, and I need to hand over to you, Casper, in a second. But just to sort of finish, I used to, some years into my recovery, I used to do a lot of meditation. And I remember coming into contact with a part inside myself that freaked me out so much at the time, because I just didn't understand it. But over time, I've come to understand it. And it was like there was a raw terror. It was like a sort of screaming baby that I experienced when I kind of opened and softened enough to just be with my experience and let that kind of old trauma that needed to come up. And it freaked me out when I first discovered it. And I sort of stopped meditating for a while because I didn't know what on earth to do. But, with time, I've been able, with various different modalities, as well as meditation, breath work's been very helpful for me around this. I've been able to kind of, to the best of my understanding, get to it being the result of birth trauma. And so that just holding that understanding doesn't change it, and it doesn't sort of, make it all okay, but it provides a context that supports my ability to stay with it and allow it to move through my system and for me to get more freedom around it. So, I mean, there's so much more that I could say, but I'll leave it there for now. Caspar, hand over to you.
Thanks, Freddie. So it was really interesting because I had a lot of stuff coming through listening to you, and I really enjoy listening to you. Sort of just something just about the way that you tell your story that really kind of captures my attention and my imagination as well. And so I'm thinking in terms of the roots of my addiction, when I heard my mother's story, when I heard what had happened to her, and I think I know more about what happened to her than I do my father, which is interesting, but the level of trauma that she experienced, and I experienced a lot of trauma growing up, and it's not that it's a competition or that it's really healthy to compare, and understanding what she went through really sort of put into context, it's like, well, is it any wonder? And then with what I went through, I don't really feel like going into the details of my mother's story, but it was kind of as bad as it could get, in terms of the parenting and her mother, and how she was treated and her father, etc. I think by the time I was 15, it was clear to me that my background, what had happened to me, and the makeup of my parents, the odds were stacked against me in terms of being able to have have some kind of a stable childhood, whatever. And and what you said, what you articulated, I thought really beautifully, this piece around, what we get modeled to us enables us to then, we take on that modeling, and if we have a healthy modeling about watching parents cope with things, then we can in turn then learn how to cope, with things as they come to us through our lives. And I think my father was able to cope, was able to defend and protect himself and support himself, but in a very tricksy, anti-establishment, anarchistic way. And so that was certainly my modeling, was that, that's how you survive. So I saw he seemed to be a strong person in a lot of ways, but obviously there was a lot of stuff underneath that, and he had a lot of mental health issues that he'd gone through, what he continued to go through, but that he experienced some really severe stuff before I was born. So in terms of the roots of my addiction, it's like, I think it's been passed down through generations, and who knows, we can each of us trace our line back to the beginning of time. We are the kind of the sort of the arrowhead of our ancestral line. So it goes back. So who knows how, who knows what happened to those, those members of my ancestors. But I sort of feel, and I try and do it with some humility, that a big part of my journey in recovery and in life is breaking that ancestral line, that repetition of the mistake. And I'm going to read a poem in a minute, which just came to me when you were, Freddie, when you were speaking, which I just think is an amazing poem by D.H. Lawrence, who's known for, I think probably best known for Lady Chatterley's Lover, but he was an amazing poet. And it also connects to what you said, Freddie. So, we wrote the preamble, and in the preamble, it says, we believe that addiction is a major cause of societal breakdown, dysfunction, and disconnection from ourselves, each other, and our communities. It isn't simply to do with chemical or alcohol addiction. And then Freddie actually added and said, well, it can also be a symptom of dysfunction, and the result, it's the other way around as well. It's a kind of manifestation of things that happen to us, in our family life, in our family line. Anyway, the poem, I think I'm kind of half making sense with that. The poem is, I've got some horrible thing, is called, is it called I Am Not a Mechanism? I can't see a title for it. Anyway, I'll read it twice. It's relatively short. It's always really handy I find to hear the poem twice. So I am not a mechanism, an assembly of various sections, and it is not because the mechanism is working wrongly that I am ill. I am ill because of wounds to the soul, to the deep emotional self, and the wounds to the soul take a long, long time, and only time can help, and patience, and a certain difficult repentance. Long, difficult repentance, realization of life's mistake, and the feeling oneself, and the freeing oneself from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. I'm not going to read that twice, but it's there, and I can, and I find that such a powerful piece, because it's, this idea that, my root, that I'm crazy and that it's all my fault, which I think is something that, a lot of us can do. We can kind of take on the responsibility for what happened to our parents, or what happened to us, or what happens to the world. And this piece about from the endless repetition of the mistake, which mankind at large has chosen to sanctify. That could be unpacked for hours, what that means. Is my audio still okay, Fred?
Yeah, it's doing okay.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'm just going to shut down the internet because that might free it up. So, the wounds to the soul that poem spoke about, that's definitely something that I felt and experienced as a young person, and what I've been working with and exploring and healing, and being as compassionate and loving as I can towards, all my adult life. And really, I feel it's only in the last sort of 5 to 10 years that I've, landed in my body more. And I think I spoke about this on the last multi-addiction meeting, this idea that, being sort of slightly shocked out of my body, or no, completely shocked out my body, but coming back in when I felt comfortable and safe. So it's taken me so much of my adult life to be able to sort that out. And, I can get pissed off about that and, think, I had a rough deal. And also I can just look at it and go, well, this is the material that I've been given, and that, all of us that, that I speak to who are in recovery, that this is what we're dealt with. And, we should some kind of compost, with which manure that can produce something potentially beautiful, a flower or a plant or a tree or whatever. So I think, is there anything else I wanted to say? I think that this roots, and that the deeper the roots go into the ground, the more potential there is for the strength of the tree above ground, and for it to grow up. And I really like that. And so, but those roots also incorporate my shadow, so it's, incorporate those nicks and those cuts. And I think, Freddie, you could call it death by 1,000 cuts, those pieces. But so it's all in there. So it's not about me trying to push any of that stuff aside, but also not to be overwhelmed by it, and to allow that to be part of my growth, and allow that to be the tap roots that go down into the soil and create a really firm foundation, so that the tree above ground, if that's, as I see myself, can, gets moved and swayed by the wind and by the weather and the elements, but it can still withstand that. That's my bit. That's our bit. Yeah.
Thanks, Caspar. I just wanted to just quickly respond, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you for everything that you've shared. You feel like you really brought it together. And particularly mentioning the ancestral element of this. We're understanding more and more in recent years about intergenerational trauma, and what a real thing that is. It's not kind of theoretical. It's actual. And not only are we carrying it genetically, but on some other mysterious kind of soul level as well. These things that our ancestry have been through are repeating and looking for resolution within us, or whoever it is that's, as you say, at the sort of figurehead of that particular line. And I think all of this really helps to broaden out the understanding from the burden of personal responsibility, of a too narrow form of responsibility, to something that's about, that's kind of about the human experience. And those of us who seem to have found themselves within the experience of profound association, leading us to require ourselves to almost, kill ourselves in order to tolerate life. Then there's just actually so much more going on around that. It's not just our own personal dysfunction, and we haven't mentioned collective, and we haven't mentioned this point within humanity's evolution, which is of course also in there. So it's a massive topic, and it's delicious to begin to explore it with you, Caspar. Thank you, and all the rest of you. And I hope it's going to be interesting and useful and revealing to dive in there and explore.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. I mean, I'm just going to say a couple of words on that. That I think that branching out from this idea that I'm an addict and that it's this this line, I'm not a mechanism made up of a series of parts that's broken or whatever, that we and I, I'm a manifestation of society and of the world, and within that I'm connected to everything. I think sometimes, for a lot of my time as a recovering addict, I'd see myself as separate to society, that I was broken, a few fuses had blown, I had to go off somewhere and kind of sort myself out. And it's that we are perhaps a sort of slightly magnified version of what a lot of people are experiencing in society, people who have addictions, but maybe they aren't impacting them in a particularly negative way. And so rather than seeing, like, as you were saying, rather than seeing myself as or ourselves as separate, and that we need to take ourselves, I mean, I think that, yes, we do. We need to have spaces where we can share, but I'm really interested in having that conversation with the wider world, with other people who, maybe have touched addiction in some way through their family or friends, or they've had moments in their lives where they've gone down that particular route. So I think it is, I mean, it's a big old topic.